It's springtime, and so naturally, people's thoughts are turning to marriage. Mae West, with whom I'm often compared, is fond of saying that marriage is a great institution, but I'm not sure I'm ready for an institution just yet. The question this spring, actually, though, is whether a great institution, the United States Supreme Court, is ready for marriage. You all will remember the case of Loving against Virginia, perhaps the winner of the competition for the best name ever for a Supreme Court case. In that case, Chief Justice Warren wrote for a unanimous Supreme Court that Virginia's ban on interracial marriage violated the Constitution, in part because the freedom to marry with which it interfered has long been recognized as one of the vital personal rights essential to the orderly pursuit of happiness by free men. And I'd say free women, too. So now we are waiting on tenterhooks, in a sense, to see what the Supreme Court is going to do about two marriage cases in front of it. The Hollingsworth against Perry case, which is a challenge to California's reinstitution of marriage inequality after a decision by the California Supreme Court holding that California has to allow all couples to marry. And the second case, United States against Windsor, a case in which I've been involved, which involves the constitutionality of a federal statute, the Defense of Marriage Act, which is surely a winner in the competition for the most misleading name for a federal statute ever. It will be very interesting to see what Justice Scalia, whom Nan mentioned earlier, as saying nobody could ever vote against the Voting Rights Act because it sounded so good, so that made the Voting Rights Act suspect, does about the Defense of Marriage Act, because who could vote against a defense of marriage? I'm still trying to figure out what the act is defending marriage against, and I haven't yet done that. But while we're waiting for the Supreme Court to rule, I think it's important for us to recognize something else, which is that it takes much more than a celebrated judicial decision to realize our constitutional values. Loving was the end of a sustained assault on racial discrimination, and almost all of the troops in that campaign were not Supreme Court justices. They were ordinary Americans who were extraordinary Americans. People like Robert Moses and Fannie Lou Hamer, like John Lewis and Viola Liuzzo, and like Mildred and Richard Loving. Loving didn't create change in American hearts and minds. It reflected change that was already there. Now, in the past quarter century, we've moved from the era of Bowers against Hardwick, a case in which the Chief Justice of the United States felt free to compare the sexual intimacy of gay people to murder, and not in a complimentary way, to an era in which a majority of Americans support legal recognition for gay families. We've moved in roughly a generation from a nation in which no state provided legal recognition to same-sex couples to one in which 2 in 5 Americans live in states that do. And without that change on the ground, the Supreme Court would not even be considering protections for same-sex couples. Now, how did that change occur? Well, after we were at the Supreme Court to argue United States against Windsor this year, we came down the steps of the court, and I hope for all of you who are lawyers, you get the opportunity one day to come out of the Supreme Court with your client and have hundreds of people screaming your client's name. It's an experience like no other. But when we came down the steps and we had the little press conference afterwards, somebody asked Edie Windsor at the press conference, what made the change? Why are things so different today? And what Edie said is, it's because we came out. It's because we came out. We moved, as Donald Rumsfeld would put it, from being unknown knowns, that is, the ones they don't know, to being known knowns, that is, people who know that they know gay people. And they know gay people, and they respect gay people, they value gay people, and they love gay people. Now, you all know there's an old joke about a conservative is a liberal who's just been mugged, and a liberal is a conservative who's just been arrested. Well, today's version is a supporter of marriage equality as a politician who just discovered his kid is gay. So what are we waiting for? Well, in the words of another old joke that many of you have heard, this couple, they've been married for 60 years. They go to see their lawyer and they say, we want a divorce. We've been married for 60 years. And the lawyer says to the couple, you've been married for 60 years. Well, we've never gotten along. But you've been together the whole 60 years. Yeah, but we just hate each other. So why now? And they said, well, we've been waiting for the kids to die. And I think the generational change in America shows us that in some sense we're just waiting for a generation to die or to change its minds. So there's a wonderful poem by Marge Percy that I thought about when I was asked to speak today, and it's called The Low Road. It begins by asking, what can they do to you? And initially, the answers are pretty depressing. Although alone you can fight, the message is alone you can't win. But then the poem builds, and I want to end my introductory remarks by reading you the end of the poem, because I think it captures so powerfully why we're here today. But two people fighting back to back can cut through a mob. A snake-dancing file can break a cordon. An army can meet an army. Two people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, love, massage, hope, sex. Three people, don't worry, they can't give sex. Three people are a delegation, a committee, a wedge. With four people, you can play bridge and start an organization. With six, you can rent a whole house, eat pie for dinner with no seconds, and hold a fundraising party. A dozen make a demonstration. 100 fill a hall. 1,000 have solidarity in your own newsletter. 10,000 power and your own paper. 100,000 your own media. 10 million your own country. It goes on one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again and they say no. It starts when you say we and know who you mean, and each day you mean one more. That building tide is what we're here to celebrate today. And now it's time to present the annual Alliance for Justice Champion of Justice Award. This year there actually are 4 champions of justice because we're honoring 4 statewide coalitions that successfully fought for equality in the 2012 elections. It's one of the great stories of electoral success in recent years. These groups from Maine, from Washington, from Minnesota, and Maryland have completely changed the national conversation about same-sex marriage, and they're moving us forward faster than we could possibly have imagined. They have an amazing story to tell, and they have lessons to share. And the Alliance is proud to celebrate their achievements today. They demonstrate a principle that's at the heart of the Alliance's Bolder Advocacy Initiative, that lasting change is possible when fearless nonprofit organizations join together with energized citizens and with courageous public officials. The fact that several more states have legalized same-sex marriage since the election, including Minnesota itself, of course, is proof of the momentum that these campaigns have provided. So now let's get started. Our first champion of justice is Washington United for Marriage. This coalition was made up of over 800 organizations, congregations, unions, and businesses, and it was a masterpiece of organizing and the successful communication of powerful ideas. Together, they built a successful statewide campaign to pass Referendum 74, which ratified the bill legalizing same-sex marriage that had passed the state legislature earlier in the year. I have to mention also that turnout in Washington in the 2012 election was an astonishing 81%, no doubt boosted by the amazing work that Washington United performed. So here are 2 examples of how that campaign talked to the people of Washington and achieved its victory.
I'm a regular guy. Went to high school, played sports, got good grades. My moms are my role models. They've made a lifetime commitment. When I meet a girl, fall in love, settle down, and get married, I'll be there for my wife no matter what. Just like my moms have been there for each other. That's what marriage is all about. I know how much they love each other. I just hope that my moms and all committed couples are allowed to get married.
I was married for 23 years to the love of my life, and he died 6 years ago, and I miss him every day. I think to myself, how could I deny any couple, whether they're gay or straight, that incredible bond of marriage? Allowing marriage for same-sex couples is a question of fundamental fairness. We're all God's children. Who am I to pass judgment on others? As a Republican, I don't believe the government should tell anyone who they can or cannot marry.
And now to introduce Washington United to this audience in the other Washington, we're privileged to have with us today the senior senator from the state of Washington, a woman who has the daunting task of also chairing the Senate Budget Committee. Please welcome a great leader in the cause of equality and a longtime advocate of access to justice for all Americans, Senator Patty Murray.
Thank you so much. What a great crowd. There's a lot of energy here today, and there should be. A lot of you were involved in some amazing victories this past year, so congratulations to all of you for your tireless work for equality on behalf of millions of Americans. You know, when former Washington State Governor Gregoire signed the marriage equality bill into law last year, it was a day of joy for all of the loving, committed gay and lesbian couples in my home state, and for all of us who respect and support them. Unfortunately, there were those who felt the need to try and turn back the clock and roll back the gains that we'd made, but thankfully, there was an impressive coalition of organizations and unions and congregations and businesses in our state who were determined to work just as hard, if not harder, to defend our victory and pass Referendum 74. Washington United for Marriage was on the front lines, right up until the final ballot was counted, to make equality a certainty for all of those around our state. And since we're standing here today, I think you know how that turned out. And now, the state I love is one step closer to ensuring we are not discriminating against anyone because of who they love. It was a moment for our state to show why we are looked upon as a national model for being inclusive, for being accepting, and for embracing what makes us alike and what makes us different. But most importantly, it was a moment to reaffirm the fundamental right we all have, from Seattle to Spokane and across our nation, to live and love freely, fairly, and equally. I'm here because in Washington State, when we see discrimination, we stand shoulder to defeat it. And I'm here because of the astounding work done by Washington United for Marriage. Now, their fight did not end there, and I know it doesn't end for anyone here today, but the tide is turning. And because the LGBT and allied communities are so committed to achieving equality, it is turning rapidly. But there is a lot more work to be done. Now, right now in Congress, we are working to end DOMA once and for all. I'm working with others on tough new measures to combat bullying and harassment in our schools. And I have called on Secretary Shinseki to allow LGBT veterans and their spouses to be buried in national cemeteries without delay. And it is why I am working to change outdated policies that say LGBT couples have to face a paperwork nightmare to be able to file their taxes jointly. I'm working with many of you on these issues of equality and fairness, but perhaps nothing I do will be as important and as meaningful as when I joined with Washington United for Marriage to mark yes on my ballot on R-74. So I want to thank Washington United for Marriage for all of their tremendous passion, for welcoming me and others to join them in the struggle, and for having the courage to stand up for what is right. They showed the nation once again that we can change the course of history and give true voice and meaning to the idea that all are created equal. They are proof of the incredible power that a community has when people come together to fight for equality. I am very proud to represent one of 12 states and the District of Columbia that have affirmed the right for LGBT couples to marry, an amazing sign of progress in our nation. and I'm proud to continue that fight in the United States Senate. But I am just as proud to introduce to you today one of those amazing people, Amy White, who is former chair of the Coordinating Committee for Washington United for Marriage. She will be accepting the Champion of Justice Award on their behalf. Amy?
It's nice to put your bling up first. Well, good afternoon. It's my great honor and privilege to be with you today. Thank you, Senator Murray, for your longstanding leadership on behalf of LGBT equality in the Evergreen State and your steadfast commitment to justice and ensuring that all Americans have the opportunity to reach their fullest potential. It's truly a personal career highlight to share the stage with you. And thank you to our hosts at the Alliance for Justice, to whom I personally owe a debt of gratitude. When you build a coalition, you need friends who know how to do that. And the Alliance for Justice is just that. Phone calls, emails, video conferences, you name it, the Alliance for Justice team was there for me. So I'm here today to represent Washington United for Marriage. And I imagine, as most of you are aware by now, otherwise you're at the wrong lunch, Washington United was the campaign that was first put together to win marriage in the legislature and then became the big campaign that upheld it at the ballot box in Washington State. However, more importantly than the campaign and what that, and the yard signs and the phone banks and the house parties and the house parties and the house parties and the eventually victory parties, I'm actually here to represent the couples and the families that on November 6th, or in our case in Washington, November 7th, heard a message loud and clear. They heard that love is love and that their family was perfect and beautiful and accepted. They heard that love wins. I had the unique role in our campaign to lead what we called the Vast Coalition. I don't really know who came up with that name. It's sort of stupid. But basically, it was the 800 plus organizations, nonprofits, churches, corporations, and small businesses that made our movement real. It's what took us off of the television screen and into the hearts and minds and homes of Washingtonians and voters. It might have been at your local coffee shop. We like the coffee. Or it could have been from the pulpit of your church on a Sunday morning. Our strategy to win was banking on the idea that the bigger the coalition, the harder it would be to escape our message. And that message was a powerful story of love, commitment, and most importantly, to approve. This coalition, as you might imagine, was like wrangling or herding cats. Better yet, herding cats that were sort of high on catnip. So from that place, I share a few stories. There was days when we would get calls out of the blue from nonprofits who would eagerly be wanting to help, but had no idea what an H election was. Alliance for Justice, are you there? We also had small business leaders who were coming out of the blue who wanted to make approved cupcakes and approve hamburgers and approve coffee and approve anything you could possibly eat. You could approve it at the same time. And then I think one of my favorite stories, and one that I know will be a thread that you see throughout the conversation today, is the power of the faith community that we had. And my colleagues in Maine and Minnesota and Maryland can attest to the power of the church lady. The church lady comes in many forms. She may be a Christian church lady. She may be a Jewish grandmother. But church ladies are the power. They are a force. Do not cross them. And what I'm happy to say that is in Washington, we got those church ladies to pick up the phone and dial their church lady friends. But at the core of it, they also did what church ladies do best, which is to make hot dish. That's for my Minnesota friends. At the end of the campaign, we literally had church folks across the state that were feeding thousands of volunteers who were calling into the home of upwards of 75,000 folks a night. And they all had food, thanks to the church ladies. So all that's to say is that we like to eat in Washington and drink, but really in all seriousness, that the thread that ties all of this together is that we're all, in these epic moments in history, we're all called upon to lead. And my leadership might look different than yours, and yours might look different than the church ladies, but we all have something to bring to the table. We each have power, and we use that power as a collective, our impact is amplified. The concept of amplification is why I'm here today, and what I think the Alliance for Justice means to me and means to many of us, is that helping coalition partners identify their voice and what they uniquely bring to the table, and then asking them to put it into action is what the Alliance does best. We had a commitment as a community and as a coalition. We refused to leave anything on the table. We knew that regardless of the outcome on November 6th, we were going to play to win and hold nothing back. We couldn't have done this without the expertise and support of the Alliance for Justice and many of our other national partners that are in the room today. So thank you for the fuel and for the creativity, for the coffee and the cupcakes, and most of all, the inspiration to make sure that love wins.